With $40 billion of new deficits, $40 billion of new spending, that's to say $2,400 for every family in new debt and new inflationary spending. And now, for the first time in a generation, we're spending more on debt interest than on healthcare. That's money for bankers and bondholders rather than doctors and nurses.
Like a ticking time bomb, the debt clock is creeping up on the American northern neighbors, with each passing second bringing citizens closer to the inevitable reckoning, where the repercussions of a nation's fiscal irresponsibility will echo through history. This is the specter of Canada's exploding national debt, a looming crisis that threatens to unravel the very fabric of Canadian society, shattering the hopes and dreams of generations yet unborn. It is a crisis that has been hiding in plain sight, obscured by the fog of the country's partisan rhetoric and political expediency, but one that can no longer be ignored or wished away. The numbers are eye-watering, almost incomprehensible in their scale. The Canadian national debt now stands at over $1.1 trillion. That's up from $688 billion when Trudeau first took office back in 2015, with the Liberals adding over $400 billion since their inauguration. Exacerbating the situation further, this figure progressively goes up by almost $400 million daily, a figure so vast that it defies the imagination, and when compounded, this countrywide deficit is expected to climb to $1.4 trillion by the 2028-29 economic year. Canada's debt has grown by leaps and bounds in recent years, fueled by a toxic combination of runaway spending, anemic economic growth, and a political class that seems more interested in buying votes than securing the long-term fiscal health of innocent citizens. From fiscal year 2021-22 to 2023-24, federal debt interest costs nearly doubled from $24.5 billion to $46.5 billion. Consequently, Ottawa will spend almost as much on debt interest in 2023-24 as it spends on the Canada Health Transfer, $49.4 billion, sent to provinces to help fund healthcare services. The government also spends more on interest costs than on the Canada Child Benefit and National Daycare programs combined at $31.2 billion. The consequences are dire, exacerbating the strain on hardworking Canadians already struggling to make ends meet. It's a vicious cycle that threatens to undermine the very foundation of Canada's economic prosperity and social stability. In this video, we are going to get an insight into national debt and how it's crippling Canada's economic growth and stability. We'll burrow into the root causes of this burgeoning debt crisis, examine its far-reaching implications for Canadians, and explore potential solutions to mitigate its damaging effects. According to the Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's fall economic statement, the cost to service the federal government's sizable national debt load will spike in the years ahead, and those public debt charges will eat up much more of Ottawa's revenue than they have in recent years. But what exactly is national debt, and why has it become such a cause for concern in recent years? In simple terms, national debt refers to the total amount of money that a government owes to its creditors, both domestic and foreign. It's the sum of all the deficits that a government has accumulated over time, minus any surpluses that it has managed to generate. For many OECD countries, including Canada, borrowing money has become a necessary evil in the quest to maintain economic growth and fund essential public services. Governments often turn to debt financing when they intend to invest in infrastructure projects, stimulate the economy during downturns, or cover shortfalls in revenue. However, the problem arises when governments become overly reliant on debt and fail to exercise fiscal discipline. When deficits become chronic and debt levels spiral out of control, it can lead to a host of negative consequences that threaten the long-term health and stability of the economy. Sadly, this is the precise situation that Canada finds itself in today. The country's national debt has been growing at an alarming rate in recent years, fueled by a toxic combination of reckless spending, anemic economic growth, and a lack of political will to tackle the problem head-on. According to the latest figures from the Department of Finance, Canada's federal debt stood at a staggering $1.49 trillion as of 2023. To put that number into perspective, it means that every Canadian citizen, from the youngest infant to the oldest senior, owes roughly $30,800 as their share of the national debt. But the debt itself is only part of the story. Perhaps even more concerning is the exploding cost of servicing that debt, the interest payments that the government must make to its creditors each year. As the debt grows, so too does the amount of money that must be diverted from other priorities to simply keep up with the interest payments. In the 2022 to 2023 fiscal year, the federal government spent a whopping $24.9 billion on debt servicing costs alone. That's more than the entire budget for the national defense, and it's a figure projected to keep rising in the years to come as interest rates normalize from their historic lows. So why is the national debt growing at such an exponential rate? Several factors are at play, but one of the biggest drivers has been the government's penchant for deficit spending. Year after year, the Ottawa Liberal government has consistently spent more money than it has taken in through taxes and other revenues, relying on borrowed money to make the difference. This chronic overspending has been exacerbated by a string of crises and economic shocks in recent years, from the global financial meltdown of 2008 to 2009 to the COVID-19 pandemic that brought the world to a standstill in 2020. In response to these challenges, the government has ramped up its spending even further, pumping billions of dollars into emergency relief programs and stimulus measures. While these interventions may have been necessary to prevent an even deeper economic collapse, they have come at a steep cost in terms of added debt. In the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year alone, the federal government ran a deficit of $354.2 billion, the largest in Canadian history. While the deficit is projected to decline in the coming years as the economy recovers, it will still add hundreds of billions of dollars to the national debt in the process. But why is this growing debt burden such a problem for Canadians? The answer lies in the long-term consequences of unchecked borrowing. As the debt rises, so too does the risk of fiscal crisis, a situation where investors lose confidence in the government's ability to repay its debts, leading to soaring interest rates and a collapse in the currency's value. Even absent a full-blown crisis, the mounting debt puts increasing pressure on the government to find ways to service its obligations. And more often than not, that means higher taxes on individuals and businesses. As the government scrambles to raise revenue to pay its creditors, it leaves less money in the pockets of Canadians to spend and invest in the economy. Another reason is how much financial burden these deficits indirectly place on Canadians. Governments pay debt interest through general revenue, which ultimately comes from taxpayers. As government debt interest costs rise, they divert money away from services such as healthcare, education, and social services. While the scale of indebtedness varies depending on where you live, the combination of federal and provincial debt interest will cost residents anywhere from $1,764 per person in BC to $3,225 per person in Newfoundland and Labrador in 2023-24. According to a recent study by the Fraser Institute, the average Canadian family paid $42,457 in taxes in 2021, which amounts to 43% of their annual income. This staggering figure includes income taxes, payroll taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, fuel taxes, vehicle taxes, profit taxes, import taxes, sin taxes, and more. In contrast, the average Canadian family spent 35.7% of that income on basic necessities such as food, shelter, and clothing combined. In a more recent study, 74% of Canadians surveyed feel that the average family is being overtaxed by the federal, provincial, and local governments. As the debt continues to grow, it's likely that this tax burden will only increase in the years to come, leaving Canadians with even less disposable income to make ends meet. And for those on fixed income, such as seniors and people with disabilities, the prospect of higher taxes can be especially daunting. However, higher taxes are not the only way that the government can service its growing debt load. Another option is to simply print more money, a process known as monetizing the debt. By increasing the money supply, the government can effectively inflate its way out of its obligations, paying back its creditors with devalued currency. Nonetheless, this approach comes with its own set of risks and unintended consequences. As more money chases the same amount of goods and services in the economy, it can lead to rampant inflation, eroding the purchasing power of everyday Canadians. Over time, this can lead to a vicious cycle of rising prices, stagnant wages, and declining living standards. According to Statistics Canada, the annual average consumer price index, which measures the average change in prices paid by consumers for goods and services, rose by 3.9% as of March 2024, the highest increase since 2003. This means that the cost of everyday items like food, gasoline, and housing is rising faster than wages for many Canadians, making it harder to make ends meet. Many economists argue that the actual deficits and debts are not what we should focus focus on. Instead, they say the federal debt size is consequential relative to the national economy's size, the debt-to-GDP ratio. The government's own projections paint a similarly bleak picture. The finance minister's document suggests that the federal debt-to-GDP ratio, a key measure of a country's debt burden relative to the size of its economy, would rise to 42.7% in 2024 to 25 before subsequently declining. Data indicate that 7 provinces are likely to see an increase in their ratio of debt to GDP between 2007 and 8 and 2023-24. Analysts expect Alberta to have the largest percentage point increase in this ratio, which is projected to grow from negative 13.4% to 9%, an increase of 22.4 percentage points. Manitoba is projected to have the second largest percentage point increase in its ratio, rising by 16.1 points. Newfoundland and Labrador has the highest debt-to-GDP ratio among the provinces at 41.6%. Quebec ranks second highest with a debt-to-GDP ratio of 39.2%, followed closely by Ontario at 38.7%. Quebec, however, is one of only 3 provinces that have decreased their debt burden relative to the economy since 2007 and 8. Other provinces that need to decrease their debt burden relative to the economy include Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. To put this in perspective, a debt-to-GDP ratio of 60% is often considered a red line by economists, a threshold beyond which a country's debt becomes unsustainable and poses a serious risk to economic growth and stability. While Canada is not yet at that point, it is rapidly approaching it, and the trend lines are not encouraging. As debt grows, it crowds out private investments and stifles the economic flourishing of a country. When the government borrows money, it does so from the public and businesses. Increasingly, savings purchase treasury securities instead of going towards productive capital investments like startups and other businesses, research and development, and new sustainable technologies. So what can be done to address this growing crisis? Unfortunately, there are no easy answers or quick fixes. Tackling the national debt will require a sustained effort over many years, if not decades, and it will involve difficult choices and sacrifices from all Canadians. One essential step is to truncate government spending and bring deficits under control. This will require a fundamental rethinking of the role of government in Canadian society and a willingness to make tough decisions about which programs and services are essential and which can be scaled back or eliminated altogether. It will also require a more strategic approach to economic growth and competitiveness, rather than relying on debt-fueled spending to stimulate the economy. Policymakers must focus on creating sustainable, long-term growth conditions through investments in innovation, productivity, and human capital. This means fostering a more competitive and dynamic business environment, one that encourages entrepreneurship, risk-taking, and job creation. It means investing in education and skills training to equip Canadians with the knowledge and abilities they need to succeed in an increasingly global and technology-driven economy. If you like this video, hit the like button and help us spread the word. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on our latest news and analysis. In the meantime, check out one of these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.